Hello, my little buzzlings, and welcome back to the Tea with B podcast with me, your host, B. Today's show, I'm very excited as we are talking about privacy in the Web3 world. Now, that is a huge topic to uncover, so I have my amazing guest. I have Chris, or as he's known, Castig, on a lot of the Web3 world. Welcome, Chris. So glad to have you.
Hey, B, how's it going? So glad to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. Now, Chris, you want to introduce yourself a little bit in the sense of who you are and what your authority is to be talking on privacy in Web3?
Sure, yeah. My name's Chris, and I am co-founder of Console XYZ. It's a Web3 secure chat platform for Web3. I'm also a professor at Columbia University Business School, where I teach a variety of technical topics, including blockchain and Web3. And I was formerly a developer and entrepreneur as well.
So. Amazing. And you can find Console, it's Console DAO on Twitter.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So Chris, let's get into the idea of privacy in Web3. Now, of course, it dominates the topic because we're talking about decentralized world and giving the power to the people. But there's a lot of things when it comes to privacy, when it comes to blockchain that people may be ignoring. And going back to Console, it's very similar but different as Discord. And for people who may be unfamiliar with Discord, Discord is a chat app that was very popular with gamers, but it does have a lot of issues that we'll get into a little bit later. So talk about the importance of privacy, especially in the world of Web3, where everyone is talking about decentralized, but whether or not everything is decentralized is a different story.
Yeah, sure. So to pull those ideas apart a bit, because they do get wrapped up kind of in one ball, and they are related. But decentralization is one idea, and I'd say privacy is sort of a separate idea. So let's break it down into steps, maybe. And I'll do a higher level overview, and B, then you could double click when you want. But I think decentralization is the concept. It's really about resilience is probably the easiest way to think about it. I like to just kind of, I love to do a very deep dive into history, but I'll keep it brief and we can kind of go wherever. But I think the original need for decentralization is probably one of the best metaphors or visuals of how decentralization builds resilience. And yeah, B, I'm not sure if you've heard this story before, but yeah, the internet was originally designed in the 1960s as a way to potentially protect communication from a nuclear bomb. So let me explain what that means. The idea was, there was the Cold War, and in America, we were quite afraid of the Soviets, and they were getting more advanced with their technology. They had just launched something called Sputnik, which was a satellite that flew above the United States. And, the president at the time, he was worried that, well, if they could get a satellite above our heads, maybe they could potentially drop bombs on the United States, to put it bluntly. So they started to develop this network. And the idea was, how would we have a network where if any part of the United States was hit, whether it was like Atlanta or Chicago or LA, that we could have resilience, that the network itself wouldn't go down because one part of it went down. And back then things were quite centralized, but there wasn't really that idea, wasn't in it didn't make sense. It wasn't easy to make a decentralized system. But visually, that's just kind of what I think about when I think about decentralization, is this the idea of the original internet is this kind of map. And it's basically you could take it out, you could take part of it out and it will keep going. And, we apply that now, that kind of resilience, to the apps we make, because, again, in history, apps are being fairly centralized. We look at our data on Facebook, it's all in one place on Facebook, or our Instagram photos, or WhatsApp, right? Even I think all three of those companies are owned by the same person. So, So, we start to ask ourselves, how do we make technologies that will be more resilient than one person, more resilient than just a central point of failure? And that's really the decentralization aspect of the Web3 movement.
And so talk about where privacy goes into it, and especially when it comes to communication between people, and why privacy is important, and let's talk about some of the downsides of whether it's Discord or some other messaging apps in terms of some of the loopholes that they have when it comes to the privacy of the people that actually use it.
Yeah, privacy is very, I believe, is very important and very underappreciated by most people. Um, all of our data is stored on this magical cloud that we call the internet. The internet's nickname is the cloud because it's like this amorphous kind of, we don't know where it goes, but it's like we just put it up into the space, right? The truth is most of our data is in a few locations copied at these like kind of centralized locations around the world. And historically there have been data breaches happen basically like every day. Just this past week, LastPass had a data breach. Anyone that has passwords with LastPass, I don't believe the passwords themselves were jeopardized, but some of the sensitive information around them were. And I think for me the biggest moment of what I'll call like the cloud bursting, like this kind of our private data bursting like all over, was when Edward Snowden revealed to us that our government was reading all of our text messages, looking at all of our photos, every single thing. Basically, in his memoir, he talks about, and that's not just like fantastical, like hyperbole, but actually, it was literally happening where there's this software called XKeyscore, and it was able to just literally like Google for everyone's private phone, everyone's private computer. We assume a level of trust when we upload our data to the cloud. But the past 10 years have revealed to us that that's just not there. And it's happened again and again. And it just continues to happen. So, I think there's this opportunity to take that back and to reclaim our data. Privacy should just be a normal thing that you want. You don't necessarily have to be up to like clandestine, like evil things. It's a right. It's a human right, I would say.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. And before we kind of go into some of the issues when it comes to other messaging apps and the privacy loopholes that they clearly don't really care much for the users, let's go back into the topic of decentralized in the sense of it's something that you and I talked where decentralized is not always as good as it sounds. So let's get into that in a certain sense of in Web3, a lot of people, whether or not they're true believers or they're, one of the people that are just kind of joining the wave, DeFi, decentralized, everyone is trying to go towards that because it does provide power to the people. And I'm all for power to the people. It's one of the reasons that I love, Web3 and blockchain world. But talk about some of the downsides of having everything decentralized and how when it comes to in the future, it's really kind of impossible to have everything decentralized.
Yeah. I think there's two main like broad categories of decentralization. And that kind of helps to understand the limits of when it's useful. I would say there's technological decentralization and there's organizational decentralization, and both have their limits of usefulness. Some people use the term like sufficiently decentralized. I would say that's what what we're working at with Console is, and this is like as of this recording, anyone who's building an app or thinking of starting a company, and you're wondering, should I make it 100% decentralized? The truth is that's very hard to do with the current state of technology. And it's very expensive, like in terms of time or getting a product out to people and even just like trying to use those technologies. So the truth is like, yeah, it's a bit of a myth that things have to be 100% decentralized. Certain things should be. And I think one of those is the blockchain. And that's, we could harness that decentralization and bring it into our apps. But the downside of trying to make everything decentralized from a technological standpoint, like I said, it's going to be expensive. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to be slow. So those are three things. From an organizational standpoint, that decentralizing. So basically, what I mean is imagine there's no leader, right? It's really hard to have governance, which is the idea of decision making and getting things done. And yeah, sometimes it could just be extra noisy and not as focused, I would say. So,
Mhm.
this is what we're seeing if we talk about DAOs and like decentralized organizations, that organizational decentralization. I think it has its limitations of usefulness for most use cases. Yeah.
Mhm. And to put that into more layman's terms, if everything was decentralized, for example, if you lose your password, it's gone and there's no one to reset it for you. So that's why I brought up the question in terms of why decentralization is not always good, is because you do want someone, it doesn't necessarily have to be a person or people, but there has to be something that, makes it possible for people to continue to use it. If you lose your password again, you have to be able to find it. Otherwise, you'll end up like that guy who has been looking for his hard drive with Bitcoin for 10 years now. Okay, let's get it, Chris. I'm excited to talk about this part, which is some of the privacy issues that Discord specifically has that I like to discuss. And the reason that I was excited to have you on is because I've been using Discord for years and years and years, but it was only a couple of months ago that I have found out that they actually have access to all of your messages. Even if you delete your profile, they still have access to it. So there's clearly a lot of privacy issues when it comes to that. So let's get into that. I mean, as you already mentioned, Instagram, WhatsApp is owned by Meta. And as we know, Meta is not the best when it comes to containing people's privacies. So what was your motivation for starting Console, and how does it address the issues that companies such as Meta and Discord that have information to your private information? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, the inspiration for starting Console was, I think, a bit of a frustration, which is how a lot of startups start. And then also potentially just an opportunity to make things right. The frustration came from particularly Discord, which made me feel like an outsider in Web3. And, I share that as being someone who's been, teaching blockchain for 4 years, and I studied distributed networks as my master's. And I was just like, I don't know what's going on. But it turns out, I think the medium of Discord being thrown into this just like chaotic group, which was really made for gamers, like Discord was built for gamers. It didn't feel like a place where I could get things done. It was confusing. It still is. And then, on top of that, we started to learn specifically about a lot of the security hacks, basically the Discord hacks, which for a large part, I would say spiked somewhere between like earlier this year, like January 2022, and the summer. I think people are getting a little bit more wise about how much money they put on Discord. There's also been a crypto winter of sorts. So, but there was like a huge spike where millions of dollars aggregate over just hundreds of communities had been stolen in just like a few months. And it didn't really feel safe either. So there was all these things that were really against, I think, this experience. And at the same time, like, I have really deep seated beliefs in the opportunity of Web3. I think Web3 is so powerful to make our technology more resilient, to make it more open, like being that you could share data, share ideas. And this idea of ownership with Web3 is amazing. Like, you can own a piece of, the creativity and share that and share with other people and learn together. All of these things were really inspiring me. And at the same time, every Web3 community seems to be building on Discord. So it just seemed to me like this is not the best way to do this. Maybe we can do it better. And I would say that was kind of the start for starting Console.
So how did you go about building a new communication app? Is that difficult? And how does the process, also, how is the timing wise in terms of when you have that idea and then when you finally get to kind of birth that idea?
Yeah, sure. We started, I mean, my last company, uh, I feel really lucky. Like, I feel like one thing leads to another sometimes. My last company was lucky enough to go through Y Combinator back in 2013. It's like, I don't know, it's considered like the Harvard for startups. And, I only say that like, I feel like I had this like amazing exponential growth in knowledge of what it takes to run a company. In my last company, that I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to learn that from books. It's hard to learn it without doing it yourself. Just kind of jumping in, and building something. And to be fair, I had had a few companies before that had not done so well. So, ups and downs.
You learn.
But I share all that because I think the one thing I learned building in Web 2, if we want to call it Web 2, that applies to anyone building in Web 3 is, well, it's a lot of the same ideas of you want to build a product that people love. It's not enough just to have an idea. It's really about execution, all this kind of stuff. You want to test it with users. So going into it, we had this idea to improve upon chat, to have a chat platform for decentralized communities, but it wasn't enough to just start like coding it day one. So we actually this is about last fall. So in the fall, we took about 2 or 3 months and we just interviewed and just chatted with people every single day to understand how they were using Discord, Telegram, Slack. What did they like about it? What didn't they like about it? What were DAOs doing? What tools were they? We had a team of 3 of us and we were just diving deep and we were just like making Miro boards. We were making Notion pages. And I think all of this was really fundamental in like honing down what we had to build, which it became clear that in order to have a more secure, private, and authentic chat app, we needed to really get decentralized identity really, really done well. Decentralized identity, basically what that means is like, we as Console don't want to own your username and your identity. You should own it, right? And so, we looked at a lot of different ways to do that. And that's essentially what we kind of landed on. So that took us a few months to get to. And then, yeah, we started building it. You asked, is it easy to build an app? I don't know. It's hard. I mean, yes and no. I mean, if you have the right people, sure. I think getting the right people involves storytelling and also, of course, fundraising, which involves storytelling. So I think it's definitely challenging. Yeah, I don't know.
But I love how you said it in terms of you have had successes and you had failures, but you learn from them, and you really do just have to start and just do it. If you feel like you have an idea, you're right. It's one thing having it, but you have to implement it. Now, Console is rolling out at the start of September.
Yeah, we've rolled out to 2 communities so far, and they're in kind of closed, quiet beta. So we've been testing it, kind of like a slow launch, and from there, we have quite a bit of a waiting list, but we're excited to get to everybody on our list to slowly roll that out in cohorts over the next few months. So yeah.
Amazing. So Chris, can you said that you went through and kind of did that research, which is amazing. You went to users, you want to figure out what they're trying to get out of a messaging app. So what's different about Console compared to Discord or compared to Geneva, which is a new one, which looks almost exactly like Discord? So how is it different? And I love that you brought that up in the sense of Discord is very difficult to, when you're a new user to Discord, it is very disorienting. It's confusing in terms of how to organize it, how to look for messages. So how has Console solved those problems?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that you touched on that's really important, and I think makes us stand apart, is this idea of decentralized identity. I mentioned that a moment ago. And decentralized identity, what that looks like, in case anybody's super new, well, basically there's these things called web wallets, and web wallets are basically like, they call it a seed phrase, but it's basically a password that represents, it's your own kind of passport to Web3, right? And so these are free and you could download them. And examples like MetaMask or the Hiro, HIRO wallet. And these are free and you could download them. And there's a real difference in security and in ownership when you own your identity. And so, you mentioned Discord and Geneva, both of those, Geneva too, like you need an email and a password to use those, which right then make them very centralized in that respect. Because, as a developer myself, like basically what's happening there, anytime you put an email and a password in, you're just like a record in their centralized database. And if they want to access your account or masquerade as you, or delete your account, you're just a record in the database. You're one click away from that. That really inverts and changes on sites where you own your own keys. You have access, to your identity. There's all gradients, to be fair to what I'm saying. Like, it's all gradients of like possibilities. It depends how you code the thing, to be honest. Like there's all in betweens, and there's loopholes and all that stuff. But I'd say fundamentally, if it's a centralized identity system, you don't own your identity. And if you have your seed phrase, it's like kind of like if you don't have your seed, not your keys, not your identity. So we think that's really important. I think that's one of the big differentiators that people are going to notice and appreciate as soon as you get onto console. Because what comes with that, and I'll do two more, so many things, but I could give two more things. Because what comes with that is like, if you and I are chatting, I can know if you have something like a .eth name, right? My name's Castig.eth. If we're chatting, I know with a very high level of confidence that you are who you say you are. Using a decentralized identity like a .eth name, it's kind of like, imagine like a domain name, like a URL. And with that, if I'm at google.com, people know, okay, I can trust this site. Like, it says google.com in the browser. It's kind of the same thing for identity. And when we have that level of trust, that helps to clean up a lot of the spam, a lot of the scams, a lot of like the shilling stuff, because right now anybody could just spin up any name, and it becomes really difficult to kind of have verified networks of trust. So that's all really important. And I think a big differentiator that the two apps you have don't have. And I'd say the third thing, beyond that, is just that we've really rethought the design and to make console feel much more focused, much more intentional. I would say if anyone listening has experience with Slack, it's a little bit more like Slack, much more like Slack than Discord. But just the idea that you're with your squad or your team or your community, there's not a lot of people coming in and out. You could have that kind of level of trust with your network and focus. And we think that's really important, and it's going to feel a lot better.
Yeah, and I agree that Slack is definitely a lot better and easier to use than Discord really ever has been, which I don't understand why it hasn't changed, but maybe this is going to be a final push to change a little bit. Now, Chris, one of the questions I had for you is, when we're doing our little pre-interview, you kind of mentioned that console is definitely legit. And can you kind of explain what that means in the sense of that it being a legit company, especially, there's rug pulls every other day. So tell us a little bit more about how, console, what the future is, what are the people kind of behind it other than you, and what your plans are with the app and taking over and the future with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, console is a project that myself, I mentioned, some of the other things I've worked on, and my co-founder Dave Lieberman are co-creating. Dave Lieberman is the former CEO of Triller, which is a multi-million user app, video sharing app, very popular. And he's been a friend of mine for quite a while. So yeah, we were really excited to collaborate on this. And the project is backed in a large part by Trust Machines, which is a company, the company with a stated purpose of really building apps that I'd say further the use cases of Bitcoin specifically. Now, Console's not only just for Bitcoin, we're a multi-chain app and we're about chat. But one of the things that we do that's exciting to Trust Machines, that we're excited about, I mentioned decentralized identity. We use .btc as like a name that you can use so that your identity is secured by the Bitcoin blockchain. So we have Trust Machines raised $150 million to work on a bunch of things, one of which is giving some of that to us to support us in funding. And we're really grateful for that. And so, we have that funding, we have that team, a great co-founder. And we're about 12 people right now. We've been working on console for about 8 months. I think as far as trust goes, So I think you could trust the people working on it to a degree, but there's nothing like trusting the code. And so at some point in the next year, we will open source the project. We're going to wait until we get a little further along. But at some point we will open source it, and it'll remain open source. And we're really proud of that ability to show, not only what's going on under the hood, but also I think, to just build that rapport and really kind of eat our own dog food with Web3 values.
I didn't even know that's amazing. And now you mentioned you're rolling out betas to a few groups. So what's the timeline in terms of people who hear you, they're super stoked, they want to get Console? How do they go about it? And when can they actually start using it? Yeah,
great question, B. If you're interested in joining, I would say check out our website. It's console.xyz. From there, you'll find the application. I think it's start.console.xyz, where you can apply as a community, or you can follow us on Twitter, I'd say, for all the updates over the next few months. And we'll be in touch. We try to, we're generally excited to chat with everybody, although there's been a lot of incoming over the past few weeks. So we're doing our best, but if you apply, we will, we'll read them all, and we'll get to you when we're ready. So I think just go there, sit tight, and follow us on Twitter, add to the conversation. We'd love to hear what your community needs are. That's also why we're connecting right now. Like I said, user feedback is really important. We want to build this for people. We're going to love it. So
I love that. That's amazing. Chris, as I'm wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to add? Now, I will have all the links and the websites in the description, but please drop your hashtag, your @ if you like, and anywhere else they can find you, and any information that you feel like you still want to get out.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that was great. If anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm on Twitter @Castig. It's CASTIG. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and would love to hear from anybody.
Amazing. And like I mentioned, on Twitter, they're Console DAO. That's what their username is, so you can find them there. But Chris, thank you so much. Such amazing information. I'll have all the links, all the websites, and the usernames in the description for this episode. So please go and find Chris and Console. Really is an amazing app that's going to be changing the way that we talk to each other, which is fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for being a guest on the Tea with B. You have been absolutely incredible.